Narrator. Imagine a strip of land so narrow you can see the East China Sea on one side and the brackish river delta on the other. It's barely 400 meters wide in some places, less in others. Yet, on this fragile spit of coastal sand, billionaire developers have spent the last 2 decades stacking one 60-story glass monolith after another. They are pouring millions of tons of high-density concrete directly into shifting silt, porous marine limestone, and aggressive saltwater. They didn't just build apartments here. They built monuments to extreme wealth. They stamped them with the logos of global Italian fashion houses, legendary British sports car brands, and ultra-luxury German automotive giants. And right now, rising from a prime waterfront lot in this high-end district, the crown jewel is going up. The Grand Celestial Bentley Residences, 61 stories, 749 feet of gleaming diamond-patterned glass, 216 ultra-luxury units. And the centerpiece? A patented heavy-duty vehicular elevator system that lifts multi-million-dollar supercars directly from the street into a private, glass-enclosed sky garage inside your living room. Prices start at 38 million yuan, nearly 5.5 million US dollars. The duplex penthouse? A staggering 260 million yuan. That is over 37 million US dollars. The total project cost is a massive 4.5 billion yuan. But there is a catch. The tower does not legally exist yet. Handover deadlines have already been quietly pushed back 3 times, from 26 to 27, and now deep into 28. But here is what does exist. An explosive peer-reviewed scientific study published by a top-tier National Geological Institute using satellite radar data precise to the single millimeter. The data identifies the exact foundation of this unfinished luxury tower as one of 35 megastructures along this specific coastline that is actively sinking into the earth. And here is something even more terrifying, buried deep within the legal architecture of these car-branded towers. An ironclad liability exemption clause makes it crystal clear. The elite automotive manufacturer whose prestigious logo is bolted to the facade has absolutely zero legal responsibility for anything that happens inside the structure. Not for the foundation defects, not for the structural settlement, and certainly not for the multimillionaire buyers. The name is licensed. The liability is not included. If you are already subscribed to this channel, you know exactly what we do. We track the arrogant engineering calculations, the corporate greed, and the silent structural failures that the marketing brochures try to hide. If you are new here, this is the raw truth behind the world's most expensive engineering disasters. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's dive deep. To understand the slow-motion catastrophe unfolding at the Grand Celestial Bentley Tower, you have to look past the gold leaf sales gallery and examine the brutal geology beneath the city. The marketing agents call this the Riviera of the East. Engineers call it a giant, waterlogged sponge. The entire coastal zone sits on a treacherous foundation of oolitic limestone and deltaic silt. A highly porous rock formation, riddled with subterranean channels, through which tidal seawater has surged for millennia. Deposited directly on top of this sponge-like bedrock are thick layers of highly compressible, completely unstable marine sand. Geologically speaking, this is arguably the worst possible place on Earth to erect a 61-story reinforced concrete megastructure. The water table here rests just a few feet below the asphalt. Constant tidal shifts move the groundwater back and forth beneath the surface, continuously rearranging the sand grains. When a developer drives massive foundation pilings and pours an enormous concrete mat slab weighing tens of thousands of tons, that staggering weight bears down directly onto these volatile sandy layers. The ground compresses, the sand shifts, and the mega towers move with it. Scientists spent years tracking this silent phenomenon. They analyzed 222 high-resolution synthetic aperture radar images captured by advanced orbital satellite constellations. They measured the physical positions of balconies, exterior glass curtain walls, and primary structural concrete elements all along this waterfront strip with sub-millimeter precision. The results were published in a prominent earth sciences journal. The lead geophysicist on the project admitted the data stunned his own research team. Almost every single megastructure built directly on the coastline was experiencing active subsidence. The study documented 35 high-rise buildings that had sunk measurably. Some structures registered a vertical displacement of 2 centimeters. Others showed up to 8 centimeters of downward movement in just a 7-year window. But the most alarming data points belonged to the brand-new car towers. The ultra-luxury German-branded tower completed a few years ago showed over 10 centimeters of total subsidence. The Italian fashion-branded residences recorded 4 centimeters. And the Grand Celestial Bentley Residences site, even before the main structural concrete core could be topped out, was already registering 4 centimeters of deep ground displacement. The skyscraper was still an unfinished skeleton of rebar and wet concrete, and the very earth beneath it was already giving way. Narrator: to truly comprehend how an engineering project of this scale begins to sink before it's even finished, we have to look at the cold, hard numbers. We are talking about an astronomical volume of materials. The foundation mat for a 61-story tower like the Grand Celestial Bentley Residences requires pouring over 25,000 cubic meters of high-strength, marine-grade concrete in a single, uninterrupted 36-hour cycle. That is an unyielding block of stone weighing roughly 60,000 metric tons, sitting on a footprint smaller than a standard football pitch. And every single kilogram of that weight relies on friction pilings driven deep into the earth. Engineers on this project slammed over 180 heavy steel-reinforced concrete piles down through 70 meters of volatile coastal sand, hoping to anchor them into the solid oolitic limestone bedrock below. But remember what the satellite data proved. The limestone bedrock here isn't solid granite. It is a porous, honeycombed matrix constantly flushed by shifting seawater. When the orbital radar data from the National Geological Institute was compiled, the timestamps revealed a terrifying timeline. The satellite's automated radar pulses hit the concrete structure at precisely 1814 hours during every orbital pass. Between 2022, when the first foundation pilings were driven, and mid-2026, the vertical elevation line for Lot 18401 didn't stay flat. It curved down, a steady, unyielding drop of millimeters per month, accumulating to a total displacement of 4 centimeters, before the glass curtain walls were even hooked onto the upper floors. When reporters from the regional municipal news outlet confronted the research team, the lead geophysicist, Dr. Zhang, revealed that they initially thought the data was an instrumentation error. They cross-referenced the orbital radar with ground-based laser telemetry and German aerospace radar models. The measurements matched perfectly. The ground was failing to hold the load. But what truly shocked the structural engineering community wasn't just that the tower was settling under its own immense weight. It was the fact that neighboring completed towers, structures that had been finished for nearly a decade, were still sinking long after their initial construction compaction window should have closed. According to Dr. Zhang, the primary mechanism of this ongoing disaster isn't just static gravity. It is the violent high-frequency kinetic energy of ongoing high-rise construction all around them. Think about it. For 20 years, this narrow strip of land has been subjected to non-stop hydraulic drilling, massive diesel pile-driving hammers, and deep foundation excavations. These relentless mechanical vibrations travel through the wet sand layers, like sound waves through water. The vibrations break the friction bond between the sand grains, causing them to rearrange themselves into denser, tighter configurations. The sand collapses inward on itself, creating localized underground voids that can never recover. Call that mechanical compaction, with the relentless flow of tidal groundwater, and you get a subterranean fluid dynamics nightmare. As the tide rises and falls across the delta, seawater forces its way through the porous limestone, washing away the fine silt particles that help stabilize the sand. The earth beneath the towers is literally dissolving and washing out to sea, millimeter by millimeter, hour by hour. A senior structural forensic expert at the China Academy of Building Research, Professor Li, was called in to analyze the satellite data. He issued a chilling warning regarding what engineers call differential settlement. If a 60-story building sinks uniformly across its entire footprint, It is a massive structural headache for utility connections. But the building itself remains straight. But if the seaside edge of the tower sinks by 8 centimeters, while the landside edge sinks by only 2 centimeters, you have introduced differential settlement. Professor Lee explained it using a brutal, simple analogy. It is the short leg on a coffee table problem, but scaled up to a massive, rigid 749-foot reinforced concrete tower. When a building leans by even a fraction of a degree, it completely redistributes the internal forces calculated by the structural software. The immense compressive load shifts away from the central core walls and forces itself onto the perimeter columns. The concrete slabs are subjected to unintended bending stresses they were never designed to handle. The physical symptoms of this structural agony show up in a very specific, progressive sequence. It starts quietly. Fine, hairline cosmetic cracks begin webbing through the drywall in the luxury corridors. Then, the internal geometry of the building deforms. Heavy, custom-engineered glass doors inside the multi-million-dollar apartments begin to stick in their frames. Windows that were perfectly square become slightly trapezoidal, binding against their tracks, or worse, shattering spontaneously under immense pressure in extreme, unmitigated scenarios. Professor Lee warned that differential settlement can reach a critical tipping point. The internal concrete matrix suffers micro-fracturing around the internal rebar. Once the internal structural margins are completely used up, the building can experience a sudden, catastrophic acceleration of downward movement. To be absolutely clear, the scientific team emphasizes that the current satellite data does not mean the Grand Celestial Bentley Tower is in imminent danger of a sudden collapse. No major structural failure has been logged inside the current concrete frame. But the academic team didn't mince words either. They officially petitioned the Municipal Housing Bureau to implement mandatory, high-resolution, continuous fiber optic monitoring across all 35 sinking structures, and to create an open, public database detailing the exact subsidence rate of every high-rise on the coast. They argued that luxury real estate buyers, local residents, and city emergency services have a legal right to know exactly what is happening to the earth beneath their feet. But in a multi-billion yuan real estate market, transparency is the enemy of the sales pitch. While the scientists published their terrifying radar charts in academic journals, the developers kept the concrete mixers rolling, the marketing teams kept spinning the dream, and wealthy buyers kept wiring their deposits. Narrator: if you think the slow-motion sinking of the Grand Celestial Bentley Tower is an isolated incident, you don't understand how the hyper-paced luxury real estate market operates. This isn't a single flaw in a single foundation. It is a systematic, industry-wide blueprint for shifting massive risk onto unsuspecting buyers while corporations pocket billions. And to truly understand how this pattern plays out, we have to look at the other glass giants rising along this exact same waterfront strip. Let's talk about the developer driving this entire car-branded phenomenon, Jinmao Development, led by its aggressive second-generation tycoon, Wang Lin. His father, Wang Guohua, was a billionaire real estate pioneer who bought up vast swaths of this coastal marshland back in the late 1990s, when it was nothing but dilapidated fishing docks and cheap, low-rise concrete motels. Wang Guohua partnered with high-profile domestic conglomerates to completely transform the strip, eventually building 6 ultra-luxury, gold-tinted towers along the main coastal avenue. But it was his son, Wang Lin, who realized that in the modern luxury market, you don't just sell square footage, you sell a lifestyle signal. The name on the building is the product. Wang Lin took that marketing lesson and turned it into an absolute goldmine. When he completed the German-engineered sports car-branded tower on this strip in 2017, he completely revolutionized high-rise living. He didn't just build a luxury condo. He sold the illusion that living in a car-branded building was an extension of precision automotive engineering. He patented the Celestial Lift, a massive, high-speed hydraulic elevator system that locks onto your $500,000 supercar at ground level and shoots it up 60 stories into the sky, depositing it into a private, pristine garage right next to your dining room table. The marketing campaign was flawless. Rich investors from every Tier 1 city lined up. The sports car tower completely sold out, netting Wang Lin's company a staggering 2.4 billion yuan, over 340 million US dollars, in pure profit from a single structure. During sworn testimony in a later shareholder dispute, company executives admitted the actual profit margin was likely even higher. With that kind of cash flooding in, Wang Lin went bigger. In 2021, he announced a massive direct licensing partnership with Bentley Motors to construct the world's first ever Bentley-branded residential skyscraper at Lot 18401. The plans outlined a hyper-exclusive tower featuring a diamond-faceted glass facade designed to mimic the luxury diamond stitching found on a Continental supercar's leather seats. Sales galleries opened in early 2022, and by the time Jinmao Development secured a massive 4.4 billion yuan construction loan from a major institutional capital firm in late 2024, one of the largest private residential development loans in regional history. The hype machine had done its job. More than half of the 216 units had already been pre-sold off-plan, generating over 3.8 billion yuan in buyer deposits. Billionaires and high-net-worth tycoons signed ironclad purchase agreements, wiring fortunes for apartments that only existed as digital renderings on an iPad. They bought into the ultimate engineering fantasy, on a site where satellite radar data had already explicitly proven the coastline was actively giving way. As the auction progressed, the handover dates began to slip. First 26, then 27, now late 28. That is a 6-year gap between a buyer handing over their deposit and the projected completion date. 6 years of delays while the satellite data quietly accumulated in academic libraries, documenting the tower's steady millimeter-by-millimeter descent into the wet mud. But here is the multi-million-dollar question that the glossy marketing brochures completely ignore. What does that Bentley logo on the facade actually mean from a legal standpoint? When a buyer cuts a check for 50 million yuan to buy a sky mansion inside this tower, they are under the comforting psychological illusion that they are purchasing a product engineered by Bentley Motors Limited. They think the same legendary British-born engineering culture that builds hand-assembled, perfectly balanced luxury vehicles is supervising the structural integrity of their home. It is a complete legal illusion. Bentley Motors is not the developer. Bentley Motors is not the general contractor. Bentley Motors does not inspect the subsurface soil conditions. They do not calculate the load-bearing capacity of the friction piles, and they do not verify the concrete mix ratios. The automotive giant, headquartered in Crewe, England, and owned by the global Volkswagen Group, merely signed a highly restrictive, incredibly lucrative brand licensing agreement with Wang Lin's Jinmao Development. Under this contract, the developer pays massive high royalties and percentage fees just for the right to use the Bentley name and trademark logo on their marketing assets, and to have a brand design team consult on the interior, fabrics, color palettes, and lobby furniture. That is where their involvement starts and ends. If the foundation cracks, if the tower leans, or if the sea rises and destabilizes the entire structure, the car company has zero legal exposure. Their global corporate terms are brutally explicit. They accept absolutely no liability or financial responsibility for any loss, damage, or structural defect, however caused, regarding the real estate project. The license is strictly for the aesthetic brand. The immense physical and structural risk belongs entirely to the local developer, and ultimately to the buyers. An independent luxury real estate analyst put it bluntly during an industry seminar. When consumers hear a name, like Bentley or Porsche, their brains instantly substitute that name for structural quality. They assume the building is engineered to the same tolerances as a world-class supercar. That psychological correlation is the actual product being sold. The brand premium allows the developer to charge an extra 20 to 35% markup compared to an identical unbranded luxury building next door. That premium is worth hundreds of millions of dollars across a single project. The brand absorbs the risk-free revenue. The buyer absorbs the structural risk. Right now, across major globalized hubs, there are nearly 1,800 of these licensed luxury residential projects underway. Fashion houses, watchmakers, and supercar brands all replicating this exact same low-risk, high-return formula. The sector is projected to explode by another 120% over the next decade. It is a brilliant corporate marketing strategy, and it works because human psychology has a massive flaw. We find it almost impossible to separate brand prestige from physical product engineering. We assume that a company that makes a flawless car must also make a flawless 60-story tower. But steel, concrete, and shifting maritime geology don't care about a luxury logo bolted to the glass. Narrator: if you think the legal shielding and the silent movement of the ground are just theoretical worries for corporate lawyers, you need to see what happens when the glossy marketing veneer finally rips open. The structural warning signs aren't just invisible satellite data points anymore. The cracks are physically opening up, and the structural failures are playing out right now along the very same coastal high-rise strips of China's elite maritime districts. Let's look at a prime example just a few kilometers down the coast: the Grand Aston Martin waterfront residences. This hyper-luxury tower opened its doors to ultra-wealthy buyers with massive fanfare. But within less than 2 years of occupancy, the dream completely dissolved into a structural nightmare. By early 2026, the elite owners who had poured tens of millions of yuan into their sky mansions were hit with a barrage of severe structural and mechanical defects. The tower's proprietary car, lifts, the very centerpiece of the luxury pitch, began jamming repeatedly between floors due to micro-shifts in the building's vertical alignment. The glass curtain walls began experiencing spontaneous stress fractures, raining razor-sharp shards of architectural glass down onto the waterfront promenade below. Frustrated and terrified, a coalition of wealthy unit owners banded together and filed a massive lawsuit in February of 2026, alleging that the developer had siphoned off critical construction funds, short-changing the building's structural reinforcement systems. But guess who was completely missing from the court documents? The luxury British automotive company, whose name is emblazoned in massive, illuminated letters across the top of the tower. They weren't named in the suit. They couldn't be. They had already collected their multi-million-dollar licensing fees, packed their bags, and left the local buyers stranded in an endless, expensive legal war with a shell company developer. And it gets worse. Look at the ultra-luxury Mercedes-Benz Places Tower project in the central business district. It was supposed to be a triumph of architectural engineering, 791 luxury units packed into a soaring monument of steel and glass. But the developer ran into severe financial instability and could not secure the final tranches of the massive construction loan required to complete the specialized foundation systems. The project slammed into sudden foreclosure proceedings. While the legal battle rages in the municipal courts, about 10% of the pre-sale buyers are desperately trying to claw back their life savings and exit their contracts. Meanwhile, the German luxury automotive group continues to collect its risk-free branding fees and exploit the free marketing exposure, completely insulated from the financial and physical ruins of the site. The truth is, these construction vibrations and soil issues have been triggering warnings for over a decade. Go back to 2013. During the initial excavation and foundation, driving for that first German-branded sports car tower built by Jinmao Development, right next door to the construction site stood a completed 34-story luxury residential complex known as the Millennium Maritime Mansion. As the developer's heavy hydraulic rigs hammered hundreds of massive steel-reinforced pilings deep into the coastal sand, the earth began to shake violently. The high-frequency kinetic energy traveled through the waterlogged soil, instantly compacting the sand grains beneath the Millennium Mansion. Within weeks, the residents of the neighboring tower woke up to the sounds of structural groaning. Massive, deep structural cracks ripped across the Millennium's luxury lobby floors. The multi-level underground parking garage began to leak thousands of liters of brackish groundwater as the concrete foundation walls fractured under the shifting pressure. Even the outdoor resort pool deck split completely in two, losing its water overnight. The Homeowners Association filed an emergency lawsuit against Jinmao Development in 2013. This was years before any academic institution had published comprehensive satellite radar data on the district. It was a terrifying preview of the exact geological reality that scientists would document a decade later. The aggressive act of forcing an ultra-heavy megatower into a fragile coastal sand spit destabilizes every single structure surrounding it. The scientists were right to issue their warnings, because when structural margins are squeezed too thin in a rush to build, the consequences are measured in human lives. Take a look at what happened just 35 kilometers away in a neighboring coastal ward. On June 24, 2021, at precisely 1:22 in the morning, a 12-story waterfront residential high-rise known as the Donghai Pavilion partially collapsed without warning. While the residents were sleeping, a massive section of the building pancaked into a heap of pulverized concrete and twisted rebar in less than 12 seconds. 98 people lost their lives. It remains one of the deadliest structural high-rise failures in modern regional history outside of an earthquake or a terrorist attack. The National Engineering Commission spent 5 long years conducting an exhaustive, microscopic forensic investigation into the disaster. Their final technical findings, officially released in June of 2026, delivered a sobering wake-up call to the entire construction industry. The forensic investigators concluded that the catastrophic failure began weeks before the collapse, when 2 critical structural connections between the underground parking garage columns and the heavy concrete pool deck finally sheared apart under immense load. The investigation revealed a horrifying truth. The original building, constructed back in 1981, had structural safety margins that were dangerously narrow from the very day the concrete was poured. Over the course of 40 years, unmitigated sea spray, salt air infiltration, and unaddressed standing water in the garage had slowly corroded the internal steel rebar, expanding it until the concrete simply disintegrated from within. A structural engineer had actually inspected the building 3 years before the collapse and documented severe structural degradation to the primary transfer beams. But because the building was a private condominium, the warnings were buried, nothing was done, and the building fell. Now, to be technically precise, the national investigators officially ruled out construction vibrations and active soil subsidence as the direct triggers for that specific tragedy. The sinking ground isn't what killed those 98 people. But inside the final pages of their 2026 report, the chief investigators included a stark, universal warning that applies to every single 60-story glass tower rising along the coastline today. They stated that when modern high-rise structures are designed according to national engineering codes, they are legally required to possess robust margas against failure. This means a building must be engineered to support significantly more weight and environmental stress than it is ever expected to encounter during its lifespan. But on this narrow strip of coastal sand, nobody is asking about the true margins of these brand new, hyper-heavy car towers. What happens to those delicate engineering margins over the next 30, 40, or 50 years? As the Earth continues to settle unevenly beneath thousands of tons of rigid concrete, what happens as global sea levels rise, pushing more highly corrosive salt water through the porous limestone sponge, slowly dissolving the rock and forcing the sand to rearrange itself under loads it was never mathematically designed to carry? The German-branded tower has been actively settling and shifting for over 7 years. The Grand Celestial Bentley Residences site was already moving before the first floor was even fully cured. The Donghai Pavilion stood for 40 years before its narrow margins finally evaporated into a catastrophic collapse. How long do the buyers of these new towers think their clocks have been ticking? Narrator: following the horrific structural failure down the coast, regional authorities scrambled to contain public panic. The National Housing Bureau immediately enacted stringent new legislation requiring older waterfront high-rises to undergo exhaustive structural integrity inspections and fully fund their maintenance reserves. But this aggressive regulatory push triggered an unintended, highly lucrative loophole for mega-developers. Many aging residential blocks, suddenly facing multi-million yuan bills for structural reinforcement and steel rebar remediation. found themselves financially paralyzed. Sensing a golden opportunity, billionaire developers swooped in. They initiated massive corporate buyouts of these compromised properties, systematically demolishing the historic low-rise complexes. And what did they replace them with? Brand new, 60-story luxury towers. Why? Because under the current municipal code, brand new constructions are completely exempt from those mandatory structural remediation funds for the first 15 years of their lifespan. Look at the numbers. Jinmao Development, in a joint venture with two dominant regional construction conglomerates, recently finalized a staggering 920 million yuan buyout of the historic 1951-built Mingzhu Beach Club. This iconic estate sits immediately north of the Italian fashion-branded residences. The plan is simple. Raise the old foundations to the ground and drive a massive new forest of friction piles into the exact same sand to erect another hyper-heavy glass monolith. The real estate cycle feeds on its own structural risks. The old buildings with documented, visible deterioration disappear. New towers rise in their place, draped in luxury branding, and the geological clock restarts from zero on the exact same unstable ground. When the National Geological Institute officially published its explosive satellite radar data, reporters rushed to the municipal building to confront the district director of urban planning. Her response was right out of a public relations handbook. She claimed she had not been made aware of any actionable structural anomalies on Lot 184001. She assured the public that citizen safety remained the absolute priority of her administration. The alarming technical study generated a handful of sensational headlines on financial news feeds, and then the digital media cycle simply moved on. The gold leaf sales gallery for the Grand Celestial Bentley residences didn't close for a single hour. The tower's massive crane assemblies continued lifting heavy structural steel into the sky. There is currently no municipal disclosure law that mandates a developer must inform an incoming real estate buyer about satellite-detected subsidence measurements before a purchase agreement is executed. No regulatory framework forces a sales agent to volunteer the fact that the very dirt beneath a 61-story skyscraper had already shifted 4 centimeters vertically before the main foundation mat was even fully cured. None of that is required by the Housing Bureau, and so absolutely none of it is volunteered to the buyers. As you read this, you can still walk into the harbor showroom and reserve a sky mansion inside the Bentley residences. Prices still hold firm at 38 million yuan. The brochure still promises an unparalleled life of absolute luxury, an exclusive single malt whiskey bar, a private humidified cigar lounge, a state-of-the-art rooftop cinema, a subterranean wellness spa, and an elite restaurant operated by a Michelin-starred culinary team. You can still drive your supercar into the hydraulic lift and park it directly inside your living room on the 47th floor. The iconic Bentley wings are bolted proudly to the glass facade, but down in the dark, 60 feet below the street level, down where the steel friction piles pierce through the shifting silt, the ground is doing exactly what coastal delta ground does on a narrow spit of barrier sand. It is giving way under the weight of sheer human arrogance. Surrounded by the aggressive, rising tides of the East China Sea, the Earth is moving. Bentley Motors will continue to collect its massive risk-free royalty streams, entirely unaffected by whatever the soil does over the next 50 years. Jinmao Development will successfully close its pre-sales, lock in its immense profit margins, and eventually dissolve the specific project-level corporate entities into broader asset pools once the handover certificates are signed. The 4.4 billion yuan construction loan is already funded. The buyer deposits are securely locked in the bank. The celestial lift system is legally patented. If this tower settles unevenly over the coming decades, if the internal structural margins turn out to have been calculated too narrow for the changing maritime climate, if the custom glass doors begin to jam and the structural walls begin to fracture in 20 years, the Future Homeowners Association will have a legal claim against a local development shell company. They will be locked in litigation with an entity that may not even exist at that point. They will have absolutely no legal recourse against the luxury car company, because Bentley makes cars. Nobody is responsible for the ground.